Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Howard Alloway. I'm the procurement manager for HEPCU, which is one of the UKUPC purchasing consortia. And I'd like to welcome you this morning to our, it's the UKUPC monthly webinar, which there's a round of those going, and it's HEPCU's turn to host today. This month, I'm glad to say that we are aligning the presentation with Mental Health Awareness Week, and we are covering off or exploring in more detail the subjects of loneliness and connection. So they are key themes which underpin the themes associated with this year's Mental Health Awareness Week. So it seems timely that we do that. I'm delighted to welcome Zaina Khan with us today, who have Chakra Corporate Mental Strength, and Zaina will be leading us through the session. I'm sure that many of you will have met Zaina before. She's presented at regional and national events within the sector, so she's got a good knowledge of how the sector operates, and I'm sure there are some faces on here today that she's familiar with and will have met before. I want to give Zaina as much chance and time as she's got on the session for the hour this morning to cover everything, so I'll be very brief now, but just a couple of items of housekeeping before we start, and that is that, as I mentioned, it is being recorded. We have turned off your cameras and mics for the duration of the session, but there is a chat function available which you can use throughout the webinar. And finally, we will be asking for feedback from delegates at the end of the session. So a link will appear in the chat function, and if you can visit that and give us any feedback, we'd be very grateful. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Zaina and ask her to take on the session, please.
Thank you, Howard, for such a generous introduction. I'm definitely seeing some familiar names, but I'm sure there's some faces behind those. But yes, a very warm welcome to today's session. For anybody that doesn't know me, as Howard has mentioned, my name is Zaina. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm proud and pleased to have supported lots of the events over the last few years. And the work that I do is really around helping people to manage their feelings through better understanding their feelings. And it is, of course, Mental Health Awareness Week. The theme of Mental Health Awareness Week, as Howard mentioned, is loneliness. And there is so much that we could say about this particular theme. However, loneliness is not what we might think of when we first think of mental health. The common kind of things that spring to mind are around depression, stress, anxiety. However, I have no doubt that every single one of us will have experienced loneliness at some point in our lives. And especially in the last couple of years, where we've been away from lots of the things and lots of the people that we really connect well with. So we're going to use this session to hopefully just have some moments of good reflection and to leave us hopefully feeling a lot more comfortable with the idea of authentic connection and how we can best access that in our lives. So hopefully you're able to see my screen here, and I'm going to go through just a few points, but please do throw any thoughts, any questions in the chat as we go along. If there's anything that needs a bigger answer or a longer answer, I'm happy to just hang around for a little bit at the end, so we can put a bit more time to that. But yes, I hope that feels okay, and we will make a start. All right, so loneliness has been chosen as the theme for this year's Mental Health Awareness Week. But what exactly does it mean? Well, we could define loneliness by saying that it is a feeling of sadness arising from the desire for human contact. Loneliness can be described as the constant, unrelenting feeling of being alone, separated, or divided. And finally, we have loneliness being about an inability to connect through meaningful relationships or a close attachment to others. So we're really defining loneliness here in literary terms, and we can see that it's about the connections that we have and also the social connections that we feel that we might need. And it's very subjective. So that means it's quite different to more objective terms such as isolation, which really define the number of connections that we have around us, the amount of people around us. Loneliness is really about the connection that we have with ourselves and the people around you. So hopefully that feels okay. All right, so researchers then have identified 3 different dimensions of loneliness, and these are to help us really pick out the different types of relationships that could be missing if we're feeling lonely, those relationships that could be missing from our lives. So the first one that we've got here is what we call intimate or emotional loneliness. And that can arise when we are longing for a partner or somebody that we can share a deep mutual bond of trust or affection with. So, and of course, that is an affection that goes both ways. And then we have relational or social loneliness, and that can arise when we have the yearning for quality friendship or companionship, and there is, of course, the support that comes with that. And finally, we have collective loneliness, which is about the hunger for a network or maybe a community of people that share the same sense of purpose as us. We have similar interests. That could be a group of people that you work with. It might be a political interest. It could be a hobby, a faith, those sorts of things. So all of these 3 dimensions together reflect that full range of quality social relationships that we need as human beings in order to really thrive. And that also means that if we have a lack of any of these relationships, any of these dimensions in our lives, we might start to feel lonely. We might also have lots of really good quality, positive relationships in our lives. So, for example, we might be in a really supportive marriage, but we might still have the yearning, the longing for friendship or community. So we're just digging into this a little bit more deeply here and saying, if we don't understand the need for the types of these relationships in our lives, we can start to think that our existing relationships are lacking in something. But in actual fact, we need all 3 connections to survive. So I hope that kind of feels okay and that everybody is with me so far. All right, so just moving on to the next slide here. So why are we talking about loneliness? We've already said that there are other mental health issues that might kind of take precedence in our thinking when we think about this idea of mental health. And why then has loneliness become the focus this year? Well, the first and most important factor that we must accept is to accept that as human beings, we are, of course, social animals. And what that means is that in order for us to survive, we really have got to exist in relationships, in communities, in families, in networks, in friendship groups, in workplaces. And so when we have those types of cultures around us that we feel comfortable with, that's when we bond with other people in social groups. It's a very natural thing that happens with us human beings, and we feel good. It feels good to connect. It feels good to be connected with other people. In fact, the brain actually releases a certain type of a very particular chemical when we socially bond with each other, and that is called oxytocin. I did mention this a couple of weeks ago at the NEUPC conference, and it's like a natural high that we get just from coming together with other people. The problem that we're seeing more and more of in today's evolving world is that despite all of our methods of communication and the opportunities to connect being greater than they have ever been, it is more and more, and I'm thinking about the way that we connect with people as professionals, maybe using social platforms to do that, the opportunities to connect or meet maybe potential partners, the way that we connect with our friends, the way we keep in touch with our friends, even maybe the way that we meet friends, all of those, think about all those platforms that we use as human beings that we're using to meet each other in a modern world. And a lot of them are, as we've said, online. We really rely on those online platforms. And unfortunately, that means that our authenticity in those relationships is becoming more and more reduced. Our social media, for example, we're sharing only the highlight reels of our lives. People looking at other people's lives and seeing that they have these perfect relationships, possibly the perfect children, maybe seeing that everybody is in the gym 6 days a week or on holiday every other month. And that then puts a certain amount of pressure on us to maintain that image online, but also when we're kind of in real life situations with people. And we could sometimes start to create almost like an alter ego sort of persona and start to identify more with that than other people are identifying us with that. So what does that then do to our ability to be honest with people? Let's reflect on that for a moment. What does that do to our ability to say, maybe I'm struggling in my relationships at the moment, maybe I'm struggling with my finances? What does that do to our ability to say, I feel lonely? So our communication has become so heavily dependent on sending each other messages, on typing our experiences, our views, our opinions. And that makes it too easy to become inauthentic, misunderstanding other people and what they're saying, limiting the way that we're able to see each other. And there is the potential there to damage our sense of relationship, authentic relationship. And also, more importantly, if you're coming in just now, please do make sure that you're on mute so that we kind of can hear each other clearly. And we're saying that we're gaining that very narrow insight of people's lives. And sadly, that is what is leading to the experiences of loneliness being on the rise. We can now see through research that 9 million people have feeling the experience of loneliness right now in our modern day of life. And those are the people, don't forget, that have admitted and recognized that they're feeling lonely. Another reason that we're talking about loneliness is because it is known to be the precursor to mental health issues. We understand that feelings of loneliness are more likely to develop into mental health issues such as stress, anxiety, Alzheimer's, paranoia, depression, but also physical health issues. When someone is lonely, they feel socially threatened. And that means the brain triggers the fight or flight reaction in a non-threatening situation. So we're really on high alert, on edge. And that means the response of the body is that it produces fewer white blood cells, and we have a less active immune system as a result. So that can increase things like inflammation. It means that the body is then less able to fight off and recover from viruses, illnesses, infections, diseases. And if we do get unwell, we're less likely to recover. So just a little bit of the science in what's going on in our bodies when we're feeling lonely over a long period of time. And that doesn't just mean that people get more coughs and colds. It can also mean that loneliness is a risk factor in more serious physical health concerns such as coronary heart disease and stroke. And as many of us might know, those are two of the leading causes of death in the premature death in the UK at the moment. The fact that we're saying that we need social connections in order to survive. And human beings do become ill when we don't have them. There's been a lot of research done into this area, and the impact of loneliness has been measured to be equal to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It is equal to the consequences of consuming excess alcohol, a lack of exercise, and also concerns related to obesity. So yes, it is ultimately quite frightening. We've mentioned that there is a risk of premature death, and that is around 30% risk of premature or early death when we're experiencing loneliness. It is an incredibly heavy subject, and yes, I know this stuff does sound extremely serious, but there is a difference that we can make. That is why we're talking about loneliness. And the first step really is to identify what loneliness looks like. So how can we really start to recognize loneliness? Because although loneliness is common, we're saying that people struggle to name it. We've heard lots about depression, anxiety, things like stress. We often hear stories of loneliness in modern day society, but people really struggle to identify that experience they're having is one of being lonely. We might hear, or we might even say things like, what's wrong with me? Why am I different? And those two examples there are really around people blaming themselves for the experience of loneliness that they're having. So that can be really difficult. People might feel easily rejected by others, and that can present itself in ways such as these huge core beliefs, big core beliefs on the screen here. When people feel lonely, if they're starting to blame themselves, if they're hesitating to connect with others due to that fear of rejection, we might start to feel not good enough. People might start to feel, we're going to look at a little bit more about that not good enough a little bit later. People might start to feel as though they're being left out of situations. We might see that people feel they're unable to keep up with their social connections. And these are all places where loneliness can start to creep in. So some messages that they might reiterate are things like, if I disappeared, would anybody notice? If I was invisible, would anybody notice? And maybe saying things such as, I feel as though I'm carrying the whole world on my shoulders and I'm all on my own, or nobody can help. Experiences of self-doubt are really common when people are feeling lonely, people not having the affirmation from other people that they are good enough, worthy enough, lovable enough, because they don't see that they're accepted. And that self-doubt can easily spiral into beliefs like a difficulty with people believing in themselves, a difficulty with people motivating themselves, a difficulty with people accepting themselves for who they are, a difficulty with people maybe starting to take care of themselves, looking after themselves properly. So that's what loneliness feels like. And some of you might be looking at this, and many of us might be seeing that we have these sorts of experiences through everyday life. So those kinds of messages are there. Loneliness is just flying underneath the radar and we're experiencing it in profound ways. But the idea of loneliness is just not something that exists in our vision. It is really difficult to accept. It is a hard thing to identify because there's a lot of stigma around it. There is a deep shame, unfortunately, that surrounds loneliness. The idea that if we don't feel connected to people, or if we feel lonely, we think we're not likable in some way. We might start to think that we're broken in some way. And that really prevents us from admitting it to ourselves, but seeing how important connection is for us as human beings, and seeing that it is part of being human is something that can really help us to overcome it. So I hope that all makes sense, guys. And again, please do just put any thoughts in the chat. I know I've shared a lot there. But the truth is that there are so many signals that exist in modern day society that is telling us who and how we need to be. We start to really identify with things such as, and we are just immersed in images about wealth, reputation, and power. And those three things have almost become like the gods that people idolize as a society. We really worship those things, but they do not serve us well. And we start to evaluate our worth in those three areas. But I really want to reinforce the message today that our true sense of worth is intrinsic. It doesn't come at all from the things that we can see around us. It's about our ability to give and receive love. And that is what can help to heal loneliness. We're losing sight of that. How would you feel if somebody that you really aspired to, somebody that you really admired, based on their wealth, their reputation, their power, was treating somebody else badly? How would you think about that person? How would you see them differently? We often wouldn't like it. And that is a reflection of our values. And we will always have our values. The ability to recognize our value is something that we will always have, and we'll be able to appreciate ourselves for that. That is what gives us worth. We've got to honor the fact that we are enough through having that intrinsic sense of value, and that is true power. that is what our true self-worth is about. Yes, really good question there, David. It will absolutely be exacerbated by ASD or being an introvert. There is a book called Quiet, and the lady is called Susan somebody. I'll look into that and send the details to Howard to forward through to you all. And that is about ASD. It is about being introverted and how to really feel as though we might be reluctant or hesitant, or there might be lots of barriers that we perceive are in the way when we're trying to connect with people. So it feels as though it's an extra effort. There's more challenge when we're trying to connect with people. So that really does help us to connect more closely with ourselves, to listen to the messages that are going on internally, and to use those to help us to feel more confident in ourselves to connect with others. So I hope that answers your question, David, and we can absolutely revisit that towards the end. I will get the name of that book for you, but there's lots of material out there that can help us to understand those areas a little bit better. So we're saying that we're starting to appreciate us for being us, acknowledging those values, really honouring that self-worth comes from those, because it is hard to build on relationships, isn't it, if we are not feeling good enough. Susan Cain. Thank you, Carol. That's the one. And yes, good TED talk on that as well, if you want the summary. We might feel shame for not being good enough. We might feel as though we haven't acquired certain things, that wealth, the power, the reputation that we feel. And those insights make us so self-focused. And what's damaging is we're focusing on all the things that we don't like about ourselves. And that is really, really crushing. Sometimes if we are feeling not good enough, we try to hold on to the reasons that we don't feel good enough. We're trying to affirm it almost. Maybe we've had a traumatic past. Maybe we've made mistakes. Maybe we can see that we're not perfect, but all of those things are part of being human. They do not mean that we're destined to crash and burn. That kind of adversity doesn't mean that we're destroyed forever. It just means that we are human and we need to connect authentically and in the present. So I hope that feels okay. We've got lots of lovely contributions coming up here, which is great. I've got to pause to kind of see the chat, otherwise it just gets in the way of my screen here. So if you wonder why I'm clicking around, that is why. But hopefully that all feels okay and you're with me so far. So some of the messages that we have looked at there might have resonated with you, be it through knowing people that might be experiencing loneliness or even with yourselves. And hopefully you will feel a little bit more equipped at recognizing loneliness. However, I know that lots of you are on this call today to feel as though you are able to recognize the signs and symptoms of people that might be lonely. And there are certain populations that may be more predisposed to experiencing loneliness. I've put them up here on the slide and we'll just go through a few of them. So older adults might be one that you feel is really obvious. We might expect that older people are more likely to lose friends, siblings, parents, partners sooner. So that is one that really stands out. But anybody that loses a meaningful relationship might start to feel lonely. Remember those three dimensions that we looked at earlier, the collective, the relational, and the intimate sorts of relationships. We do need all three of them in order to thrive. And the sense of loss that we're talking about here isn't necessarily due to a bereavement. It could be things like moving away. We've got that down there that have caused it. What about working from home? I'm sure lots of us can resonate with the fact that moving from a busy office often that consists of lots of people that we like in there, to going to being at home for the whole of the working day and being completely on our own can start to expose some feelings of loneliness. Losing independence, maybe through becoming physically unwell and not being able to get out to meet people, can lead to loneliness. Young adults we've got on there are the most susceptible to experiencing that inauthentic connection that we talked about earlier in online relationships. If we have high expectations of ourselves or for other people, that can make us start to feel lonely. Not sleeping well is something that we might not consider, but often if we are experiencing insomnia or struggling with that day-to-day sleep, we're functioning on very low energy the next day. So we don't have the energy to invest in connecting with people. And that can make us feel lonely as well. We're less likely to take on opportunities to socialize as well, to accept those. We've got parents here who've left home. I know some of you will be looking at that and thinking, God, it was the best day of my life when my children left home. But unfortunately, that isn't the case for everybody. We do call that sometimes empty nest syndrome. And lots of parents actually orientate their lives around looking after their children. So that could say that it's the loss of a relationship, maybe the loss of part of a relationship, but also maybe the loss of purpose. And that's on there, no sense of purpose when children leave home. We've got strange relationships on there, and that is an interesting one. We will look at relationships, existing relationships in our lives in just a moment, but there was a program that some of you might have caught last week on the Tonight Show, and it was about abuse in relationships. Sometimes that can be very covert, very subtle, but the guilt, the shame, and sometimes the control that the victims experience, it can stop them from socially connecting with people. So if we can see that somebody kind of is in, or there's some signs that people are in a difficult relationship, perhaps a controlling relationship, it is very, very likely that they will be feeling lonely. We've got new parents on there, again, difficult to get out when we've got a newborn baby, and difficult for people to socialize. So I'm not going to go through all the rest of those, because we can see a pattern emerging here in that loneliness is most likely to affect the people who've had a significant life change, we can say, maybe experienced the loss of a relationship, people that might not be able to get out to see other people, and people that might be under a certain amount of pressure to be a certain way. And we have, of course, got minority groups just at the end there as well. So hopefully that is a little bit more, provides some insight into kind of who might be at risk of experiencing loneliness. And what we might be realizing then is that loneliness is not an obvious thing to notice at all. So we've looked at, it can manifest in lots and lots of ways, and we've looked at some signs and symptoms there. But here are some more possible signs and symptoms that can help us to see who could need support. So we've got here shyness or reluctance in social situations. That could suggest, if we're seeing people being shy, that this person isn't used to relationships or connection with people. So that could be a symptom or a sign of loneliness. Crying easily, again, loneliness is often linked to sadness, loss, grief. So that could be a sign as well. Not asking for help can be incredibly alienating for lots of people. And are they not asking for help because they maybe don't have any options to ask for help in their personal life because they are alone? Or is it because they're just used to being not being able to rely on people and maybe just doing everything for themselves? So that could be a suggestion. Addiction is always about escape. And again, it could be about people feeling lonely and masking that pain of loneliness through an addiction to a substance. We've already talked about the physical health impact of loneliness, so people having a weakened immunity. But what about people who constantly seem busy, those people that might always have a full diary, but the diary is filled with lots of activity all the time, and maybe any possible opportunities that people can use just to keep themselves busy? Is that a sign that they are craving social contact, which is why they're seeming to want to fill their time so desperately? We've got a couple of signs here that people are maybe wanting to be part of other people's lives. There's a desire to kind of connect with people despite being on the outside of them. Lack of eye contact, again, people perhaps aren't comfortable with connecting with people authentically. We've got rambling here. And is that a sign that people are trying to prolong a contact or keep a connection going with somebody despite there not being that direct focus? We've got a couple of examples here, which are about trying to attract people's attention or connection. So some potential signs there here that people might be needing others, over-dependency and comfort seeking. And then we've got overworking. So this could be something that you notice. Are people trying to avoid being in an environment at home where maybe they are alone, or perhaps they don't feel like they can be themselves in an environment at home, or maybe they don't feel like they can be honest with the people that they're at home with. So all those things are part of what can lead to being lonely. And hopefully that again is just introducing us to different ways that we can be aware. All right, so we have alluded to this a little bit with David's question. So let's link those two things together. We've already said that loneliness is about relationship, of needing relationship, authentic connection with people in order to feel fulfilled and feel as though we can thrive. And that is what results in us being a healthy human being. However, this does not mean that we can't be connected just on our own. We've got this lovely little image of the sun here. That is right, David. Some of the symptoms common with depression. What we will notice is that, yeah, okay. So this, I'm going to go into a bit about loneliness here, being alone here, and the fact that I was just going to mention that we've got this lovely shining sun, smiling sun here, which is a really nice testament to the fact that we can be all alone and feel absolutely connected with ourselves. So as we start to explore this area of mental health in response to David's question, we will notice that a lot of the feelings that are de-energizing, we have our energizing feelings, which are often what we might know as our positive feelings, things like excitement, joy, love. Anger, again, is an energizing feeling that has certain symptoms. And then we have our more de-energizing feelings, such as depression, rejection, shame, guilt, regret, disappointment, past-based feelings. Because they're past-based feelings, they might have similar sort of symptoms. So there can be some overlap. I think if we're noticing those symptoms and we feel as though actually there's a bit of overlap here, but this could be a symptom of depression, it could be loneliness. How do we know? How do we know how to step in? The fact that you have noticed that those symptoms are there is a sign that there could be some kind of mental health challenge or some kind of mental health struggle. So that is a reason there to just gently and safely step in and offer our support to somebody. And you're right, introverts do tend to recharge, the same as empaths, people that use a lot of empathy, naturally connecting with other people's feelings, perhaps absorbing other people's feelings. So that might be understood. And that really is about us feeling confident in ourselves and comfortable to say, firstly, for somebody to say, is everything okay? We've noticed that you've been doing A, B, and C. And then for you to be authentic and say, yes, I just need some time apart. So again, let's look at this area on being alone, because I think that again will be quite eye-opening in what we're talking about here, about introverts and being alone and signs and symptoms. So we might have had experiences in our lives where we've possibly been surrounded by people, and perhaps people that we truly love and people that we deeply care about, and we know that care about us as well. But we felt so alone despite being with them. And on the reverse, sometimes we might have experienced being completely on our own, but that feeling feels as though we've never felt more connected. We've really got a sense of belonging in a certain space, and we have no desire for that human contact, that definition of loneliness that we looked at right at the beginning. It feels as though we really are okay with being on our own. Sometimes we're with other people and we could be playing a role. So let's just put a bit of context to this. I'm going to trust the confidentiality in our session and say, when I visit my mother-in-laws, I am sometimes playing a role of the dutiful daughter-in-law, maybe the good wife. Yes, it is as awful as it sounds. But we might find ourselves playing roles such as the helper, the people pleaser, the perfectionist maybe, and those roles are all focused on others. And that could be because we feel that in those relationships, we feel that our needs are not met, or maybe we feel that we're not fully understood. We can't truly be ourselves. Sometimes it is hard to avoid that. Of course, it is true that with some people, we can be ourselves more than others. We can proudly show up as who we are. We don't have to hold back. We know that we're loved unconditionally. We'll be accepted for whatever we present with. And those relationships are amazing. They give us the nourishment, the acceptance, the confidence. They rid us of the self-doubt that we've been talking about earlier. But we might sometimes be in a place where we can't access those sorts of relationships. And there could be situations where we've even lost those kinds of relationships. So what is most important is to honor the fact that we must be connected to ourselves before we can be connected to each other. We have to know what the needs are that we seek from our relationships. What is the impact that our individual relationships have on us? What is our intention in those relationships? Are we going into these relationships for genuine, authentic connection? Or are we seeking something like approval or validation or something else from our relationships? And what is more important is to realize that after we've played that role that we might be in, we recognize that it's had a cost to us. We might feel drained, we might feel exhausted. Just as you said, David, introverts often feel that way after social contact. So we've got to learn to give back to ourselves and to really nourish ourselves with that healthy connection, honest connection again. That doesn't have to involve anybody else. It is not an alternative to having human connection with other people, because we can never feel truly fulfilled if we don't have that human connection. But it's a healthy foundation for us to connect from, is to be connected to ourselves first. And so to be connected to ourselves means that we understand our worth. It's putting us, and that cannot exist with self-doubt if we understand our worth. It's a good way of eliminating that. But it means that we're saying we don't feel that we've got to prove ourselves to people. We don't feel as though we've got to be somebody that we're not in order to connect with somebody or to feel as though we're enough. But the other piece of that is about believing in ourselves and feeling grounded. And sadly, we live in a world right now where we are, it feels so chaotic. There's a lot of noise, and to allow ourselves to let that noise settle, to be in a place of peace, is so powerful, because we then start to approach other people completely differently from that place of groundedness. And when we approach other people knowing our true sense of worth and believing in ourselves, we actually find that the kind of interaction that we have is very different. We approach people with a willingness to listen and an ability to be ourselves, as opposed to trying to get something from them, as we've mentioned, maybe validation, worth, expecting them to fix us, or trying to be somebody that we think that they think we should be. We're saying that self-doubt can't coexist if we understand our worth and if we believe in ourselves. And we also are saying that we don't have to be in a place where we've got to feel we've done lots and lots of work on ourselves before we can go out and connect with people. We are designed to have those two things coexisting together as well, developing ourselves, evolving ourselves, adapting ourselves, with ourselves, so that we can see that reflected in the relationships around us as well. The two things together. So listen to your feelings when you're with other people, when you're in your different relationships. Observe how those relationships are affecting you. We can use time alone to reflect on our relationships. How are our relationships influencing us? Can we feel as though we can be ourselves with other people? Can we see other people maybe being authentic and honest and open with us? And is that empowering us to do the same? Are we okay with being vulnerable with another person. And if we feel that we're not, maybe that is a sign to just maybe create some distance, or to have more time for self-reflection when we're on our own. All right, guys, hope that feels okay. Let's move on here to loneliness through fear. And I know that might seem like a really quite a serious thing to be looking at, loneliness through fear. It can sound quite frightening just to see that. We're reflecting on who we are and how we are in our relationships, but also with the slide that we've just looked at, we're reflecting on how we are on our own. And there could be some things that we're projecting onto our relationships and in situations that we're just not aware of, and that might be causing us to feel lonely ourselves. So we're going to look at these few points here, and it could take some real honesty and possibly a little bit of vulnerability to admit some of these things to ourselves, but we're not here to judge ourselves. We've talked a bit about self-reflection just there, and the art of self-reflection is to be aware, to notice things about ourselves, things that have happened, and to not judge ourselves on those things. This is about connecting with other people and using the power of self-awareness to connect with others. So the feelings, behaviors, the reactions that we might have mentioned, or with the things that we might have formed over the years, habits that we've curated, might be hindering our abilities to connect, and that actually might be causing us to feel lonely when we don't need to. So we could have subconsciously or maybe consciously separated or divided ourselves from somebody else. I want you to just consider that most people do have something lovable about them, and that might not be something that is immediately obvious, but just because we can't see it, it doesn't mean that it isn't there. But we can use that knowledge, reassure ourselves with that. We might be able to resonate with that ourselves. You know, maybe we've not been shown the best of ourselves in a certain situation, and we come away thinking, gosh, that person has got such a bad impression of me. But we know that there's lots more to us. We know that we have qualities and personality traits and love, and that there are people in our lives that can see that, but certain situations may not expose that. So we can use that knowledge just to help ourselves to feel safer in different relationships, and actually to realize that we don't have to invest our energy, our very precious energy, which is a resource, into things like hate or dislike or tension or conflict, because that energy can be utilized in a far better way towards ourselves, towards being connected with ourselves when we're on our own, and of course in the relationships that we have. So that is something that can really stop us from feeling lonely or distant against the things that maybe we can't control as well. That unfortunately can't happen online or through social media, because we're missing so many important things, such as we're unable to grasp things like body language, the tone of voice maybe that people are using, expressions in people's faces, all of the richness that really helps us to bond with people. There is no basis of relationship. So these sorts of things that we're seeing on the screen are much more likely to be experienced when we're communicating with people online. If we're missing all of those things, we can easily fall into things like toxic views about people, toxic opinions about people. And the reality is that we do have bigger problems. We do have big decisions that we need to make in our own lives. And if we're open to diffusing that loneliness that maybe we're projecting onto ourselves through the way that we see other situations and people, we're almost alienating ourselves in a way, and that can absolutely create feelings of loneliness. We could be creating more suffering for ourselves through displaying these kinds of behaviors without even recognizing them. So just talking to each other through connection and relationship is something that can really make us feel as though our lives are more simple, more comfortable, and much easier. which definitely sounds like a pleasant thing to achieve. All right, so we've talked a little bit there about loneliness in our relationships, maybe the things that we're projecting onto relationships. And so I'm just going to bring up a few points here about the way that we might be in our relationships. I mean, a fundamental way to recognize that our relationships are meeting our needs is because we see that they're really driving our sense of self-worth. So as we're looking at these points here, we're considering things that possibly we might be doing that could be causing other people that we have relationships with to feel lonely. Sometimes we might project onto others. And yes, this does happen with people that we really care about. We might not be aware of the fact that we're doing these things. These things, sometimes we actually think that we're helping with some of these things. But all of these behaviors can result in someone feeling small, feeling lonely, and that could be despite them being in a relationship with you, and despite there being lots of positives in that relationship as well. But I'm not going to hang on to this slide for too long, but before I move on from it, just a quick note to say that we are all human beings. None of us are perfect. We're here to learn, we're here to grow, we're here to help. And if you're looking at this and thinking, gosh, I'm guilty of some of that. You know, I do these things. I didn't acknowledge that person's effort that time. Maybe I ridiculed that person when they were trying to be really open with me. The immediate feeling that we get is maybe a guilt or a shame or a regret. So what I want to say is that recognizing that we might be doing some of these things is our growth in our self-awareness. And that is a really positive thing, because those guilts and shames and regrets don't serve us. In fact, they can really debilitate us in lots of ways. So self-awareness is a positive thing. It means that we're getting to know ourselves and feel in more control of ourselves, understanding ourselves a lot better. And it is much better than being in denial or being oblivious to the things that we're doing. So that puts us in a position where we are able to make changes that feel comfortable. And so the message is really to be kind to ourselves, to accept that we're not perfect, we are growing, and self-awareness can help us to do that. So you might have been listening to this presentation here and thought, I have someone in mind. I think I know somebody that could be experiencing loneliness. And so I want to suggest a few things that you might want to suggest to them that feel kind of non-threatening and that feel safe. So we've got the first one here, which is to suggest an activity possibly that is local and that isn't social. Why is it important for it to be local? So that the person isn't kind of feeling as though they've got to expand beyond their expand beyond their comfort zone or kind of do something that kind of feels daunting, or really something that isn't them, and something that isn't social, which is really about not having the focus on being in a room with lots of people where there's a pressure to talk. I'm thinking about things like networking events, bigger events where you're kind of surrounded by people. It could be something like an art class, maybe. It could be going to your local car boot sale where there's lots of things, activity going on, but there's things that you can focus on that aren't about the people around. So I hope that makes sense, to take away that pressure of talking. Engage with them in what they enjoy or what they find comforting, and use what you can see. Do you both take your coffee in the same way? Do you both kind of, are you both into the same sort of a restaurant? Are they reading a book that you notice that you've also read? So what is it that they enjoy or they find comforting? And again, that's joining them in their comfort zone and not expecting them to expand beyond that, because that can feel daunting. Keep gestures small. We don't want to overwhelm people by kind of doing things that feel quite grand or having a high expectation of them. Little things such as, could we, if we've got a meeting with somebody or a team meeting, and we're worried about somebody in that meeting possibly being lonely, could we invite them to join us 5 minutes earlier so we can share an idea with them or run through the agenda with them, and kind of open the door to hear their opinions? Bring up a subject around an experience that you've shared. Again, it might be that you spotted them at the same supermarket as you, or they've been in the same meeting again together. I'm mentioning meetings because I know that lots of us are here from work. It could be that you have been to the same restaurant. So something that you have shared, you might travel to work in the same way, you might kind of live in the same area. So again, something, smile, we've got here, really simple, doesn't involve any verbal communication at all, but alleviating feelings of loneliness and starting to form a connection with somebody doesn't mean that we have to talk. It can be done through gestures, as we've said, and body language speaks so much. So smiling, it absolutely releases that oxytocin that we've mentioned earlier, and it can help people to just start to feel more comfortable with you. Share something about yourself, and that again is giving somebody permission to share something that about themselves, because they see that you're being honest as well as kind of being open with them, so they feel more comfortable to do that. Connect with them via a call, video call, or an in-person visit for obvious reasons. We've talked a lot about the problems with social media and online relationships, and relationships that rely on us typing. Be a great listener. If this person is feeling lonely, we don't know where the other opportunities might be in their lives for them to feel heard or to be listened to. So you could be giving somebody something huge through listening to them without kind of knowing a great deal about their other relationships. So that's a massive thing to give somebody. Confirm what they have said. Again, that affirms that you've listened to them, and that can really raise somebody's self-worth if they feel heard, understood. And show kindness. And that could be, again, with small gestures. Are you getting yourself a coffee? Could you get them one? Is there something that are you taking a break, maybe having a walk up and down the road, a walk around the building? Could you invite them to join you? So show kindness. Don't be offended if they say no, because it might feel a little bit strange to them if they've not had those kinds of opportunities regularly, but it doesn't mean that they will never kind of accept something that you might offer. All right, so if you're feeling lonely, then there might be some things that we've looked at today and that feel really close to home, and we're thinking our self-awareness has actually shown us that there are some signs of loneliness in our own experience. So I want to suggest a few things here that we can start to do to heal that loneliness. And the first one is to build our confidence. Now, that is a really important one, because that self-doubt is real. That self-esteem kind of being eroded when we don't have those social connections can really start to affect our sense of self. But to start building on our confidence in small ways, recognizing our achievements, rewarding ourselves for the things that we've done well, changing our inner dialogue to a healthier kind of self-talk can help us to prepare to be in contact with other people. Speak to as many people as you can, not necessarily with the intention of developing friendships or new connections or being involved in new networks with people. This could be just somebody that you're speaking to at the shop, the person that's serving you as you get your morning coffee. It could be somebody that you meet on public transport, or you're waiting in line with public transport. Somebody might ask you for directions and you just speak to them a little bit more. You're new to the area. What is it that you're visiting for? And that is getting you used to just talking to people. So that is a good foundation of speaking to, of starting to develop connections with people. Be in nature and open space. Yeah, that's fine, David. I know we will be wrapping up in a couple of minutes, but if you have to go, I do appreciate that. Thank you for your contribution. Limit social media. We've said be in nature and in open space. That can help us just to think more openly, but also to just see people around that are also enjoying something as we are, and that can help us to feel less lonely. Accept that loneliness is a growing issue. If we're seeing that other people are feeling lonely, or we're feeling lonely, how incredible would it be to connect with somebody else who might also be experiencing that feeling of loneliness? So that is again showing kindness, which takes courage. but we might be healing somebody else's loneliness despite us experiencing that same feeling. Express yourself on paper to get used to the way that you are feeling, to accept it and to let go. That's what happens when we write things down. Planning ahead. Are there things that we can do in a couple of weeks' time or in the near future, so we have a social event to look forward to, and that rather than not knowing what's going to happen or when we're going to see people, and allow people to help. And I know that all the independent, self-sufficient, me, myself, and I, people in the room will be thinking, gosh, that's difficult. And it does take courage to accept help, but maybe connecting with somebody through allowing that in a small way can help us to feel less lonely. We've talked a lot about relationships. How much are they giving you? Is it time maybe just to step back a little bit from the ones that don't give us what we need or meet our needs? There are lots of befriending services out there. I will send Howard a list that I have, and that means befriending services. Thanks, Tom. Hopefully see you soon. People are ready to listen and talk. There's not that pressure of you having to make connection and go out of your way to talk first. All right, so that does bring us to the end of today's presentation. I'm going to stop my screen share here. Thank you as ever for your time, your patience, and your contributions. Loneliness can be healed in the decisions that we make every single day. So do feel you can take a chance on people and do support wherever you can. Connection matters, seek it, embrace it, and focus on it. But I'm going to stop there. Thank you again, and look after you.
Thank you, Zaina. That was brilliant. Really found that very informative, enjoyable, perhaps not the word, but yeah, plenty to think about, plenty of food for thought there for us to take away from it. So it would be good if we could share within the chat facility just the link for the feedback form, please, if it's not there already. So I hope everybody has a chance to do that. Yes, thanks, Aina, for doing that. So as I say, this will be recorded, so I would encourage you to speak to your colleagues who haven't been able to attend today to look it up when it is available, hopefully next week. And I'm sure there's plenty for them to pick up on from today's session. Certainly some things in there that I'm recognizing in myself and keen to take forward there. So just before we wrap up, just wanted to let you all know about the next UKUPC webinar, which will be held on the 22nd of June at 11 AM, and that's going to be led by SUPC. And the topic for the next one will be transforming public procurement, preparing for changes to the public contracting regulations. So more information and booking details around that session will follow in due course. So really then, last thing for me to do now is to just thank you all for attending. No, it's a Friday, so very grateful for that. We've had nearly 50 participants on the course. That's really good. I'm really thankful for Zaina for all the hard work she's put into this and for explaining a quite complex topic in such a clear and erudite manner as well, and plenty of tips and hints for us to take away with that. And really now just to wish all of you a very happy weekend, and something that was mentioned both in the chat and through Zaina's presentation. If we could all be kind to each other and to be kind to ourselves as well, I think that's a nice thought to go away with. And I wish you all a very nice and pleasant weekend. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.